Aalto's built up quite the reputation for himself. He's a smooth talker that's taken the spotlight across every quest he's been in, while also being considered one of the worst characters in the game. While his kit does have quite a few problems at S0, we're seeing more and more of his potential as time has gone on and we've rolled more of his dupes. He is, without a doubt, one of the most unique characters in the game, with a multi-rolled kit that'll only get better with age. With that, welcome back to the third episode in my new series, where I'll be raising underused or off-meta characters to the max level, or close to it at the very least, to see whether or not they're worth your investment, be it your materials or your pulls. Aalto's been at the bottom of tier lists since the beginning of time, but still has a lot of potential to shine, especially in single target scenarios. Aalto, with his baseline kit, focuses on rapid bursts of damage and an incredible amount of utility, with most of it stemming from his resonance skill. This ability will cause 6 miss bullets to generate around the clone and fire off at nearby enemies, each dealing the damage of the ability. This ability, along with the 4th chain of his basic attack, generates a miss gate that, when dashed through, increases Aalto's movement speed and consumes his forte circuit, firing off a missed bullet for each charge consumed. Aalto builds up these charges whenever his basic or mid-air attack passes through mist, and all of those mist bullets deal resonance skill damage. Aalto's Resonance Liberation is a small nuke that generates a gate of Quandary that increases the attack of attacks that pass through it for 10 seconds, with a relatively high cooldown of 20 seconds and an above average energy cost of 150. Factoring in all of his abilities and their interactions with each other, Aalto's optimal playstyle centers around opening up with his resonance skill to taunt enemies and generate mist, before following up with his Resonance Liberation to amplify all of his outgoing damage. From there, you unleash as many basic or mid-air attacks as possible to build up his forte circuit and then dash through his mist to shoot all of the bullets. Proper positioning on this character is key to maximizing his damage, as it's incredibly easy to dash a bit too far in his mist state and completely miss your Gate of Quandary's damage boost on his forte. Aalto has a respectable amount of concerto energy generation, as long as you're able to dedicate enough field time for him to build up and consume his circuit. Mist doesn't last very long, with the mist from his skill lasting 3 seconds and the one from his basic attack lasting only 1.5. So quick swapping during his concerto buildup can cause you to miss out on a lot of his concerto and delay his outro skill, which amplifies the arrow damage of the incoming resonator by 23%. Aalto, unfortunately, comes with some of the worst inherent skills in the game. His first inherent guarantees a crit on his heavy attack or charge shot every 30 seconds. Aalto's heavy attack has one of the lowest multipliers in the game and should never be used in combat, and he wants to build crit anyways, making this skill essentially non-existent. His second inherent skill feels like it should have been a default ability, and it simply allows him to generate stamina while in his mist dash. His ascension stats are also typical for a 4-star character, with boosts to his arrow attribute damage and buffs to attack, lacking the critical stats we typically see on 5-star characters. When building Aalto, you want to prioritize his basic attack, his forte circuit, his resonance skill, and then his liberation. His basic attacks are pretty much used across every single part of his kit, while his liberation only increases its relatively low scaling and none of its other effects with levels, so this ability can be kept a little bit lower if you're trying to save resources without sacrificing too much performance. For his weapons, Aalto's in a tough spot, as there are very few high-end options. For the 4 stars, the new relativistic jet will be his best choice, as its high base attack and built-in energy regen on casting a skill gives him much-needed energy for the large cost on his liberation. Other 4-star options like Nova Burst or Pistols number 26 can work as well, but mainly with a lot of copies. Undying Flame and Thunderbolt, the BP weapon, focus far more on resonance skill damage, which synergizes well with his miss bullets, but don't help out the actual buildup of his forte as much. They're decent picks though. Cadenza is definitely an option if you're looking to make Aalto work as a pure sub DPS, as its energy regen is very helpful for the uptime on his liberation, but its low base attack will do quite a number on his personal damage. For 5 stars, there's only one choice, and it's Static Mist. This weapon has some fantastic benefits like insane base attack and critical rate, while also granting granting a nice bit of energy regeneration. Its passive synergizes well with the sub DPS role, granting an attack buff to the incoming resonator along with his amplification outro. When it comes to his echoes, there are really only two options. If you're playing Aalto as a sub DPS buffer, you'll want him on Moonlit Clouds alongside the Impermanence Heron, mainly for its energy regen to maximize his buffing capabilities. Arrow 3 costs will be the best choice to maximize his personal damage, as he doesn't have a ton of built-in damage percent bonuses across his kit and sequence nodes. However, Aalto can also be played as a main or dual DPS due to his respectable sustained damage and payoff for extended field time. This means you can slot him on Sierra Gale and those very same Arrow 3 costs. There aren't any other options for the 4 cost here, and unfortunately, he doesn't get a lot out of the Wind Gorilla's bonuses, as we've already emphasized how bad Aalto's heavy attacks are, and that's what this buffs. Aside from his Sonata, you'll want as many crit rate, crit damage, energy regen, and attack subs as possible, with basic attack and resonance skill damage bonuses as the cherry on top. Aalto scales very well with crit, especially as you unlock more of his sequence nodes, as he gains innate crit bonuses on his S6 and decent damage multipliers on his S3 and S4. The ease in Aalto's gearing depends on who you've already built, as he can quite easily use an existing Jiyan's Sierra Gale set or an existing sub DPS's Moonlit Clouds to get up and running. As you can see, my Aalto's at a decent level of investment and also at S6, with both a sub DPS and main DPS build. And I tested his performance across quite a few teams, and the results were pretty good. Aalto, if invested enough as a main DPS, can function even if there isn't a good recipient for his outro skill. And with my crit rate looking a bit rough on both builds, I'll be slotting Shorekeeper into all of his lineups for more consistency. Our first team up is easily Aalto's strongest, and that's a hypercarry team with Jiyan. This team follows a traditional hypercarry rotation where you build up Concerto on your support and sub DPS before stacking all of your outro skills on a main DPS. Aalto gains a lot of efficiency from some small adjustments to your setup, like immediately casting his skill at the start of battle to quickly generate Concerto and a few mist bullets. This allows you to speed up his rotation later when he dashes through mist to unleash all of his forte. You want to top off Aalto's Concerto by casting his Liberation before using the Heron and outroing to your main DPS. That's because Aalto's Liberation amplifies every attack that passes through it, even if they're not ranged. This makes the positioning of Jiyan across his rotation very important to maximizing damage, but this strategy can quickly fall apart against some mobile bosses like the Thundering Mephis. Aalto can make some small optimizations like spamming his jump attack instead of his basics, but I personally don't like using this because it feels a little clunky and leaves him very vulnerable to attacks given the unreliability of air dodges. Jiyan is unfortunately the only character that's worth sub DPSing for. The rest of the Arrow roster simply doesn't do enough damage to warrant sacrificing Aalto's personal DPS by slotting in Moonlit Clouds. This means we'll be using Sierra Gale for the rest of our teams. Our next team up is a very budget one, with Yangyang as the sub DPS supporting Aalto. This team is very similar to the Jiyan rotation, except for the fact that Aalto is the main DPS. Yangyang's rotation time is significantly faster than Aalto, and her energy regen outro is fantastic for near permanent uptime on his Liberation. You'll need his Liberation on every rotation as well, since its damage bonuses are very significant when combined with all of his different miss bullets. Yangyang's outro skill in Moonlit Clouds don't expire on swap, but Aalto prefers uninterrupted field time to inflict as much damage as possible through his low duration Gate of Quandary, so he isn't able to fully leverage her quick swap potential. With Yangyang's grouping, this team can handle a wide variety of content, as groups of enemies are one of Aalto's biggest weaknesses, and with Yangyang at S6, she can provide some great damage buffing as well. The next lineup features a more premium sub DPS, Zhezhi. This team follows a similar hypercarry rotation as Yangyang, with the main difference being that Zhezhi amplifies damage a lot more. Zhezhi's big boost to resonance skill damage and built-in ER heavily benefit Aalto's missed bullets and the uptime on his liberation. Her coordinated attacks are also fantastic for some additional damage without interrupting Aalto's field time. This team performs, but pretty much only in single target, as there's very little grouping across these kits and very low AoE, but a ton of mobility and ability to avoid enemy attacks. It's a good team, but Zhezhi does a lot more when supporting other characters. But if for some reason you have Zhezhi but not Jiyan, it's a decent comp to run. Our fourth lineup is easily the one with the most potential in the future, and that's dual DPS. For this demo, I'll be running Yangyang. This team constantly swaps between two DPS characters to maximize our damage. Zhongli's built-in time slow and fantastic swap windows allows for a ton of synergy with Aalto, who can quickly resonance skill and fire off multiple miss bullets before swapping back to Zhongli. You'll want to start your most damaging rotations with Aalto's liberation, as your second DPS's attacks will still benefit from its damage boosts. Aalto's clone is also a fantastic way of keeping enemies around your gate to maximize the team's damage. This team has fantastic performance, even when Aalto's outro skill has no effect at all. Now that we've taken a look at some of his teams, it's time to talk about his overall value and power. Aalto's main strength is his incredible in-combat utility and respectable on-field damage. With a bit of setup, he can have a relatively fast concerto rotation as well, giving him a lot of potential roles as both a main DPS, dual DPS, and sub DPS. Unfortunately, there are very few eligible recipients for his outro buff, as there are only 3 other arrow characters in the game, and 2 of them have low damage that isn't worth aligning team buffs around. His greatest potential is easily in dual DPS lineups, where he can weave in highly damaging bursts with another character, but his ideal teammate simply does not exist yet. He wants an arrow version of Changli or Shangli Yao to truly shine, and while his performance with Jiyan is fantastic, Jiyan simply doesn't have the quick swap windows to fully leverage Aalto's kit, as his personal damage scales like crazy with more dupes. Aalto's first node dramatically increases the uptime on his resonance liberation, cutting its cooldown by 40%. This gives him only 3 seconds of downtime between each missed cast, and is easily one of his biggest upgrades. His second doubles the health of his miss clone, while also granting him a 15% attack bonus if he damages a taunted enemy. His third is incredible. It generates 2 additional bullets every time one of his basic or mid-air attacks passes through his mist, giving a big increase to his personal damage. His fourth grants him a damage bonus on his mist bullets and damage reduction whenever dashing through mist. And his fifth grants him a short duration arrow damage buff whenever he dashes through mist, but needs to be constantly refreshed for good uptime. His sixth is somewhat underwhelming. It grants an 8% crit rate boost to all attacks that pass through his liberation gate, and further increases the damage of his awful heavy attack. It can be a very powerful tool when combined with Shorekeeper's buffs to grant 20.5% crit rate boost to a character, and has a lot of potential when Aalto is a sub DPS or a dual DPS. At the end of the day, Aalto might be the biggest underdog on the roster who's just waiting for his time to shine in the meta. He deals a fantastic amount of damage, especially with more of his copies, but can get very tricky to play, especially with the limitations of the current roster. His gameplay, however, is some of the most unique in the game, and he also provides one of the rarest buffs on the roster with his boost to critical rate. Once we get an arrow DPS with a more flexible field time than Jiyan, Aalto will be meta. We just have to wait. We'll be expanding the teams and compositions as this series grows and I get more and more characters built, so be on the lookout for more in-depth overviews like this in the future. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.